As you have noticed, especially if you listen to this show, there's been a lot of attention recently on left-wing indoctrination in schools and abuses of power by left-wing administrators. The corporate media has ignored these issues as much as it possibly can. Most outlets have totally refused to report on the developments in Loudoun County. Most of them have just said nothing at all about it. The Washington Post did mention the case in an article yesterday, but the article doesn't say that the assault happened in a bathroom. Doesn't mention anything about the bathroom policies Loudoun County pushed through. Doesn't mention that the alleged rapist was reportedly wearing a skirt. Doesn't say anything about Scott Smith, the father who was framed as a domestic terrorist because he got upset that his daughter was assaulted. In other words, the Washington Post reported on the story without actually reporting on the story. And even that was far more than what most corporate media outlets have been willing to do. Still, ignored as much as they want, leftist indoctrination and corruption in schools has become a major issue. People are clued in. They are awakened to the problem. And that's why the media's next strategy, since the blackout strategy hasn't worked, I mean, that's always their first go-to. If there's a story they don't want to talk about, the most obvious thing is, well, we're not going to talk about it. If that doesn't work, then they need to get a little bit more desperate. And that's when you get to the classic diversion tactic. And that's why, if you were to check CNN or NBC News or the Huffington Post or AOC's Twitter feed yesterday or this morning, you would have seen huge screaming headlines telling us about this story this is from the NBC story that AOC shared. It says, a school administrator in Texas advised teachers last week that if they have a book about the Holocaust in their classroom, they should also have a book with an opposing perspective. Now, AOC, when she was sharing this, adds this comment. She says, there's a reason white supremacy attacks history. Opposition to teaching bigotry's history and where it leads, from the slave trade to the Holocaust, is about erasing society's tools to recognize prejudice and prevent atrocity. Holocaust denial has no place in our society. None. Now, this has been treated as a major story. A teacher in a school district in Texas secretly recorded a meeting with a woman named Gina Petty, who's the district's executive director of curriculum and instruction. In the meeting, Petty is telling the teachers about the new Texas law, HB 3979, which effectively bans critical race theory. And that bill does a lot more than that. And we'll get to the bill in a minute and what it actually does. But Petty is explaining to the teachers what this bill requires and its implications. Petty, it's clear from the audio, doesn't like the bill. She also doesn't understand the bill, or at least isn't telling the truth about it, whether intentionally or not. And so the school administrator, in the context of explaining a Texas bill that she doesn't like and is misconstrued, makes this claim to the teachers about the Holocaust. Let's listen to the audio now.
We are in the middle of a political mess, and you are in the middle of a political mess. And so we just have to do the best that we can. And so we're going to go and you're going to do what you do best, and that's to teach kids.
I think we're all just really terrified.
I think you are terrified, and I wish I could take that away. I do. I can't do that. You are professionals. We hired you as professionals. We trust you with our children. So if you think the book is okay, then let's go with it. And whatever happens, we will fight it together. We will.
There's a lot of districts that are in the exact same spot we're in. And no one knows how to navigate these waters. I mean, no one.
As you go through, just try to remember the concepts of 3979 and make sure that if you have a book on the Holocaust, that you have one that has other.
How do you oppose the Holocaust?
Believe me, that's come up.
So number the stars,
Okay, so you hear at the end there, if you have a book on the Holocaust, make sure you have a book that has the opposing perspective. That's what the Petty there says. Now, an important point. The Texas bill absolutely does not require that schools give opposing perspectives on the Holocaust. It's not what the bill does. That's total nonsense. The story here is that Texas passed a law banning the political and racial indoctrination of children in schools, which would include an effective ban on critical race theory, though that's not the sole focus of the legislation. A school administrator doesn't like the bill and caricatured it to her teachers, thereby misinforming them about what is actually required of them. That's the story, if it's a story at all. But that's not what the media wants us to take from this. They want us to believe that the administrator's interpretation is correct. That this bill banning critical race theory actually prevents teachers from talking about the evils of racism at all. In fact, the Huffington Post headline about this bill when it was passed back in June said exactly that. Their headline was, Texas governor signs law to stop teachers from talking about racism. Now, if that was what the bill accomplished, then yeah, I suppose you'd have to talk about the Holocaust objectively, quote unquote, and give two sides to the issue of whether or not Jews should be exterminated. But that's not what the bill says. Here's what it says. I'll read the relevant portion to you. This is what it says. Quote, for any social studies course in the required curriculum, a teacher may not be compelled to discuss a particular event or widely debated and currently controversial issue of public policy or social affairs. A teacher who chooses to discuss such a topic shall, to the best of the teacher's ability, strive to explore the topic from diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. Okay, so this is about widely debated current events. Is the Holocaust a widely debated current event? No. The point in this legislation is that if a teacher is going to talk about some kind of controversial current event, say vaccine mandates or gun control or whatever, they should encourage the students to look at it from different perspectives, and they shouldn't force their perspectives on their students. That's all. The media has decided that if teachers can't impose their political views on students, then that means somehow they can't even say the Holocaust was bad. This is what we call a reductio ad absurdum argument, taking an entirely reasonable idea like teachers shouldn't bring their political biases into the classroom and reducing it to an absurdity by claiming that this would somehow entail Holocaust denial. As for the claim that the Texas bill stops teachers from talking about racism, I mean, that's not a reduction to the absurd so much as just a flat-out lie. In fact, the bill specifically instructs schools to teach students about a range of historical subjects and subjects related to civics, including this from the legislation. This is what it says. As something that they're supposed to teach. Quote, the history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery, the eugenics movement, and the KKK, and the ways in which it is morally wrong. That's in the bill. So, while the media Democrats say that the bill bans teachers from talking about racism, it actually instructs them to talk about it. Right there in plain language. In fact, in that Huffington Post article that says teachers are banned from talking about racism, they do include the bill itself that you can read, and you just read the bill and it says the opposite of the headline. Not only that, but it bans the practice of racism in the classroom. So you talk about racism, but you can't actually be racist in the classroom as a teacher. That's what the bill says. Again, from the legislation, it says that teachers shall not, quote, be required to engage in training, orientation, or therapy that presents any form of race or sex stereotyping or blame on the basis of race or sex, or require or make part of a course the concept that one race or sex is inherently superior, or that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive. That's again in the bill. This is not a prohibition of the discussion of racism in the classroom. It's a prohibition of racism itself in the classroom. A teacher can talk about racism, but he can't actually be racist or teach racist concepts. So the reality, as always, is exactly the opposite of what the media presents. And this is their real problem with the bill, by the way. The kind of racism just described, casting blame and guilt on the basis of race, that's exactly what the media and Democrats want in the classroom. That's what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants in the classroom and everywhere else in society. And no matter whatever else they say or claim, that's their real problem. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with all your friends.